Welcome to the Tempo Storm Meta Snapshot Breakdown. As with previous weeks, Druid still has strong representation in the highest tier, but has fallen from power with Quest Rogue taking over as the #1 deck on the standard ladder. The meta will continue to develop after the most recent America's Fall playoffs, but many found success this weekend with this anti-control powerhouse. Players have finally honed in on the power of some decks, and also have realized how powerful Token Druid is. The meta will likely continue to shift around as more tournaments are played, but without further ado, let's get into the first tier of the snapshot. Quest Rogue takes over the first slot on the tier list as the deck is as oppressive as ever. Despite Blizzard nerfing this card twice, it still manages to find its way into the meta, in this case, still finds a way to take charge of the meta. While the list has less burst now due to the quest's reward being changed from 5/5 minions to 4/4s, the deck still has an insane amount of value and can instantly beat any control deck. With the ability to go infinite with our Zola the Gorgons, we never run out of pressure against slow decks. Quest Rogue also does pretty well even against the aggressive decks that are intended to keep it in check. At the highest level of play, people are saying that the only deck that can actually hold Quest Rogue down is Secret Mage. Unless a few new aggro decks come into the meta, it's pretty likely that Quest Rogue will remain on top of the tier list. In fact, some players are calling for it to be nerfed again. If Blizzard chooses to nerf Quest Rogue, it's likely that they'll try and lower the strength of Sonya Shadow Dancer or another card opposed to nerfing the quest for the third time. The first type of Druid to find itself in the tier list is Token Druid. While most forms of Druid are very powerful, the one that's the most powerful comes down to what other decks are strong in the current meta. Due to how strong Quest Rogue is, it makes sense that the best form of Druid is the one with the best matchup against it. One thing that all forms of Druid have in common is the inclusion of cards that allow you to cheat the mana curve, such as Wild Growth and Nourish. These cards have been strong since Hearthstone's inception, and they'll continue to push archetypes of Druid. Token Druid lists now tends to opt away from running Violet Teacher and Oaken summons, and have moved to lists that feature a lot of smaller taunt minions and Strong Shell Scavenger. Using these cards together allows for you to steadily build large boards against aggressive decks, and also allows for you to apply more pressure against slower decks. This list does well against most of the current meta decks, but struggles against decks that can easily clear sticky boards. As with last week, there are a lot of Druid decks in Tier 1. Malygos Druid and Togwaggle Druid both find themselves following Token Druid in the tier list. Both decks are similar in playstyle, but have different favorable and unfavorable matchups. Each week, it seems like a different form of Druid reigns supreme, and it will likely continue to switch around based on what the other decks are popular at that time. After the Druid decks, Warlock fosters the last two decks in Tier 1. Zoo Warlock is a deck that's been extremely popular since its birth, and always seems to find a way into the meta. The ability to draw cards so consistently while dumping them out of hand, refilling the board, allows for the deck to always be somewhat relevant. Zoo can be very oppressive with the ability to start the game with Princess Keleseth, or developing large boards with Happy Ghoul and healing cards. Unlike other decks that can have such large turns early on, Zoo can naturally draw more cards, making use of their hero power, allowing them to almost never run out of gas. Zoo is one of the decks that has a good matchup against Quest Rogue, making it a very strong pick in the current meta. It also does well against the non-Malygos forms of Druid. The bad matchups for Zoo Warlock are ones where they can easily and repeatedly clear the board, like Odd Warrior and even Warlock. Speaking of even Warlock, it's the last deck rounding off Tier 1 this snapshot. While the deck struggles against some of the more popular decks such as Quest Rogue, it finds its good matchups in Quest Rogue's bad ones. For example, decks such as Token Druid and Zoo Warlock might punish the Quest Rogue players, but they struggle against some of the even Warlock players. Due to matchups like this, the meta has become a fairly large game of rock, paper, scissors, making what matchup you queue into matter all the more. Even Warlock has started to run Bone Mare in its lists, and this can turn any minion to a large threat and an aggro stomper. Being able to lock out games by buffing a minion can be instantly game-winning in a meta where silence isn't all that popular. It'll be interesting to watch how the meta evolves in the coming weeks, as every day different decks seem to be gaining more and more traction. A few weeks ago, Malygos Druid was the most popular form, whereas now Token has taken its place. Quest Rogue has also surpassed both of these archetypes and is the current meta leader. There haven't really been any new tech cards that have made their way into the meta, but we're still seeing more and more of Mossy Horror. This card was added to a lot of decks in order to combat the large amount of Giggling Inventors and even Scarab Beetles from Druid. Even some professional players such as Teray have begun to run Mossy Horror in Quest Rogue in order to combat those small pesky minions. Tier 2 has a lot of different different deck types in it, but the two decks at the top of it are Death Rattle Hunter and Subject 9 Hunter. While both decks are pretty different, they both make use of the incredibly strong Deathstalker Rexar in order to generate too many threats for most decks to deal with. Both of these decks might not be tier 1, but they're well situated in the meta, and I'll see a lot of ladder and tournament play in the coming weeks. While the meta is often referred to as a rock, paper, scissors meta, there are still ways to gain an edge in the commonly found matchups. Oftentimes, the daily meta will shift and make it hard to predict what you should play against, but one deck that does very well against the current meta is Aggro Mage. While the deck's overall power level isn't near that of the decks that are at the forefront of the meta, it still has a good matchup against a lot of the more popular decks. Aggro Mage does insanely well against both Quest Rogue and even Warlock, as well as having a fairly good matchup against Malygos Druid and Token Druid. The deck can be extremely fast at times and doesn't really allow for their opponent to assemble their own game plan. On top of that, a lot of decks aren't running weapon removal currently, making Aluneth typically really powerful. If you're running into a lot of tier 1 decks, Aggro Mage should be a wise meta choice for you. Thanks for watching our breakdown of the meta snapshot. We hope you gained some insight into the meta, and hopefully you feel much more prepared to take on the ladder meta. Let us know in the comments what types of decks you're running into. If you enjoyed, make sure to subscribe. Once again, thanks for watching. Have a great week.